I'd like to call to order the regular evening council meeting for Tuesday, May 21st, 2024. This meeting is being recorded live and is streaming on the District of Summerland YouTube channel. All representations to council, written or verbal, will form part of the public record and be available to the public for viewing electronically or as a written record. Corporate officer, any deputy corporate officer, any late items? No late items. Again, approve the agenda, please. Councillor Van Elfen and Betts, all in favor? That carries. Consent agenda. Would anybody like to remove anything from the consent? Don't see any, so if we can approval of the consent agenda, Councillor Van Elfen and Betts, all in favor? That carries. And go straight into my mayor's report. The Southern Interior Local Government Association, better known as SILGA, held its annual convention in Kamloops from April 30th to May 3rd. And Summerland was represented there with myself, Deputy Mayor Trainer, and Councillors Barkwell, Betts, and Peak were in attendance. I'm pleased to say 4 of the 6 resolutions put forward by Summerland Council were fully endorsed by SILGA, the delegates there, and they will now be submitted directly to the Union of BC Municipalities for consideration. One of our resolutions on allowing more flexible questions on referendum ballots was narrowly defeated, 44 votes to 41. So and they had to count twice, so although it didn't pass, the closeness of the vote suggests it's an issue of interest that probably won't be going away. On May 8th, along with several other members of council, I'm not sure who was all there, but we attended a very busy open house held by the Food Bank, Turning Points Collaborative, and the United Church in regards to their partnership to build a 5-story, 60-unit affordable housing project with space on the ground floor for the Food Bank and Resource Center. The plans for the Henry Avenue project right across the street are progressing well, and the goal is to start construction in the fall. On May 9th, Councillor Van Elfen and I attended the regular RDOS board meeting where directors agreed to request the Okanagan Basin Water Board to amend the terms of its assistant grants to allow detached accessory dwellings on parcels of less than 1 hectare to connect to the same on-site septic system that services the principal dwelling in the same way it allows for a secondary suite. The board also agreed to apply to the provincial government for an extension for Falder and Heritage Hills to meet their small-scale multi-unit housing requirements under Bill 44 due to ongoing challenges with the water and sewer systems in those communities. The province allows local governments to apply for an expansion beyond the June 30th deadline if there are extraordinary circumstances that would prevent compliance. Also, the RDOS board decided to defer a decision on entering into a new contract with Waste Connections for curbside waste collection in rural areas. So that's not Summerland, but in the rural areas. And they asked staff to review the cost, benefits, and risks of providing the service in-house. Last Thursday, May 19th, Councillor Barkwell and I joined a RDOS field trip to learn about 3 projects in Summerland being supported by the South Okanagan Conservation Fund. The first stop was in Garnet Valley, where the Okanagan Similkameen Stewardship Society is working with community members and property owners along Ineas Creek to limit the spread of invasive yellow flag iris. We then went to the lower section of Trout Creek to see how the Okanagan Nation Alliance has been incorporating traditional ecological knowledge to renaturalize the 2-kilometer stretch of creek from the canyon to Okanagan Lake. The work has re-engaged the floodplain and restored salmon spawning and habitat diversity. Our final stop was across the highway at Sanoka Park, where we heard about the BC Community Bat Program, and I give you all some bookmarks here. And we saw the roosting boxes installed at the park. Students at Summerland Secondary School are involved in a project to collect bat guano from the boxes. The guano is sent in to be tested for white nose syndrome, which is considered one of the worst wildlife diseases in modern times and has killed millions of bats across North America. Finally, last Friday, the 17th, Councillors Trainer Peak and Barkwell joined me for the official opening of the new tennis courts at Summerland Secondary School. The courts were built together with School District 67 and are available for both school and public use. The courts are yet another example of council partnering with the school board for the betterment of the community. And to illustrate that point, school trustee Dave Stathers and I brought our rackets along to the official opening and tested out the new courts with a friendly rally. I can report with some authority that the courts play very nicely with those with an all-court game such as Dave and myself. Although I'm sure they'll also suit the big servers and power hitters. So that's my report. CAO.
Thank you, Your Worship. We had a very successful compost sales event on May 11th from 8:30 to 4 p.m. with well over 200 loads being purchased by residents. We are currently exploring additional options for public purchase of our high-grade compost, as well as bulk sales to large consumers such as local agricultural operators and others in the community and region. The official opening of the pier has been penciled in for 1 p.m. on June 28th. We will have various dignitaries, staff, and members of council present to celebrate this project, and of course, the public and media are also welcome to attend. The basic pier design will be completed by that day, and the official opening will occur just in time for Canada Day, with residents and visitors alike once again enjoying this historic feature on our waterfront. The planned work on Giant's Head Mountain is proceeding nicely, and many former areas have been remediated and signs have been put up to remind the public to stay on formalized trails so that these other areas can grow back in. Work on the lower parking lot has also been conducted, and road improvements are currently underway for the next 2 weeks. The gate opening will be delayed from noon to 3 p.m. on May 21st to 24th, and also again on May 27th to 29th. We appreciate the patience of park users while we work to improve the site for all. Fortis gas permits are now in hand for the road and drainage improvements on Victoria up to Egger Street, which will allow us to resume work there. The contractor has been re-engaged and is now just in the process of mobilizing the necessary equipment to conduct the work. Equipment that was gobbled up by other projects when this one was delayed due to the Fortis processing timelines. We have scheduled a meeting in June with Fortis staff to discuss other projects that are on the docket for this year with the intent of seeing those permits come through in a more timely manner. Finally, I wanted to relay that this weekend we were made aware of illegal brush and tree clearing in the riparian area adjacent to 2 properties at the new Lake House development. Enforcement actions commenced on the long weekend, and while I cannot comment on the specifics of any enforcement file that's active, I would note that in a situation like this, it is common for the offending parties to be fined and restoration of the area to take place under the supervision of a qualified environmental professional. I have also personally contacted Kirkhoff Developments, who is going to communicate with the Strata Association there and remind all residents that these activities are not permitted in this environmentally sensitive area. With that, I conclude my report.
Thank you. Council, any questions for either of us? No? Okay, we'll move on. Public comment opportunity for agenda items. Is there anything actually on the agenda that can be commented on? No? Okay. So we'll move on to development reports. 9.1, temporary use permit. Oh, sorry.
You may actually comment on the temporary use permit.
Oh, okay.
Typically, we receive comment through written submissions, and we haven't received any written submissions, but if anyone does want to speak to the first agenda item 9.1, they may do so.
Anybody in the gallery want to speak to 9.1, the temporary use permit? No? Okay, so we'll move right into that agenda. Ms. Toohey.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This evening, I'm presenting a temporary use permit located at 5615 Simpson Road, and this is to allow for a residential use of a recreational vehicle. The subject property is zoned A1, agricultural small acreage, and is within the agricultural land reserve. So the proposal of the application, they are requesting a 3-year temporary use permit to allow an immediate family member use a recreational vehicle, RV. This application is a current bylaw enforcement file. This aerial view in front of you shows the property as it is today, indicating the main dwelling where the property owners reside and the current location of the RV that is occupied by the immediate family member. So to give this application some context, the lot is just under 6.5 acres, with 3.5 of that being arable. The farm is predominantly used as equestrian, with horses and a riding ring. The property owner's son took residence of the RV in October of 2023. The septic tank was installed back in 2010 for the workshop that is sited on the property, and it was connected to the RV in 2023 when it was placed on the property. An outside RV plug to the right voltage was installed by an electrical company, and verification of the permits is a condition of this TUP. Bylaw complaint was then made in November after the owner took occupancy in October. It was a concern of a person was dwelling in an RV on a property. So the RV is currently sited behind the workshop, which is predominantly out of sight. I personally took this photograph standing on Simpson Road, looking directly onto the property. There has been a structure constructed around and over the RV for access and weathering. If the temporary use permit is granted, a building permit will be required to ensure the stability and safety of the structure. If the applicant does not want to or is unable to carry out the requirements, required upgrades, if any, the structure may be required to be removed. Within our zoning bylaw, the district defines a recreational vehicle as presented here. Recreational vehicles means a vehicle which provides sleeping and other facilities for short periods of time while travelling or vacationing, designed to be towed behind a motor vehicle or self-propelled, and which includes such vehicles commonly known as tent trailers, travel trailers, campers, coaches, motorised homes, and other similar vehicles. Because of the use of the wording sleeping and other facilities for short periods of time while travelling or vacationing, within a recreational vehicle definition, a temporary use permit is required to allow for full-time residential occupancy. The ALR use regulation actually does not define what a residential structure is, which can actually include an RV, a modular home, and permanent structure. Local governments retain the authority to further restrict or prohibit residential uses on ALR properties through our zoning regulations, our building bylaws, and the BC Building Code. The District of Summerland does not currently recognise a recreational vehicle as a dwelling and does not permit the use as a permanent dwelling. On the 22nd of March, the APC, or Advisory Planning Committee, considered this application. Below is a summary of their comments. Most notable, the members of the APC wanted to know more about the conditions of the permit, and if additional items could be added by the Commission and then by Council. Life safety was one of their main concerns. The members did also discuss how adding RVs, tiny homes, and other non-BC coded structures could be considered accessory dwellings within our district bylaws. With that discussion, an additional resolution was added, with both carried with one opposing. The Agricultural Advisory Committee considered the application on the 18th of April of this year. Below, again, is the summaries of their comments. And once again, safety concerns was a lengthy discussion, as was the fact that this application, if approved, could be precedent setting. After an in-depth discussion, the following resolution was finally carried unanimously. There are various items to consider with this application. From an agricultural standpoint, the permit is temporary in nature and not situated on current farmable land, and long-term impacts on the applicant's farm process is not considered an issue. By granting a temporary use permit, it offers a flexible, time-constrained and controlled way to explore the use of RVs as a dwelling unit on agricultural lands as a temporary basis. From a district standpoint perspective, we consider the TUP duration either 1 year or 3 years, and this is a requirement of the applicant to choose at the submission stage. The applicant chose 3 years. Staff are aware 3 years could be perceived as not temporary and have council with alternative recommendations as stated in our report. The temporary use of RVs for residential purposes on agricultural lands has been utilised in other jurisdictions, such as the Regional District, and most recently a high-profile case for the City of Vernon. I have included this news article as one of the supporting documents with my report. Although there are differences in the zoning jurisdictions, for example, when the provisional changes were brought in that allowed a secondary dwelling on agricultural land, the City of Vernon did not adopt this change to their zoning bylaws. But the deep discussion of the use of an RV was the central point. The temporary use permit is unique as it allows staff to issue the permit with specific terms and conditions which must be carried out. As such, staff have included 6 of such terms. Staff are cautious that consideration of approval may create a precedent for other agricultural owners to follow in a similar manner, and the district could see increase of temporary use permits to the department. Each permit requires public notification, input from commissions and committees, which in turn make the process time lengthy. Requests for similar temporary use permit application could also create a changing of the landscape on the district's agricultural lands. With all these points considered, staff are requesting approval of the temporary use permit as stated here. Thank you, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. Council, any questions? Councillor Peak.
I have a question and then I'd like to comment as well. We have approved ATCO trailers on agricultural property in the past, have we not?
Somebody want to take that?
Through your worship to Councillor Peak, yes, we have. Generally, they're for temporary farm worker housing. That's where we've seen it most commonly utilized in that type of structure formatting. So that's a different type of approval process. It requires an ALC application. This wouldn't require an ALC application, but we have seen the use of ATCO trailers.
Sure, just could I follow up on that one though? Though they're not the same thing, right? An ATCO trailer, is purpose built for living and supposed to not be, is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, an ATCO trailer that's used for residential is designed through CSA standards to meet that certification, and this is designed for recreational stays for short periods of time.
Carry on.
Thank you. I understand the difference. I really wanted that point to be out in the discussion. I actually think that this is a good way to move forward. I think the opportunity in this particular application for a family member to help out the family, and they may not be able to find any kind of place to live. They were extremely responsible in the way they looked after it. They've hooked up to the septic system. They've done a plug-in that will work with that trailer. So I think they've been very responsible in the way they've looked at it. I think the opportunity to a 3-year temporary use permit is a responsible way for council to look at how these kind of applications might be handled. And while it might change some of the landscape in our areas, I think that quite often they can be done in a manner that is not so intrusive. And I think that this is a good possibility. So I see the opportunity with this application to show how that could be done.
So was this wasn't referred to either our fire department or Interior Health, was it?
To the mayor. Yes, it was circulated to our external counterparts. The fire department, they basically said, very much like the BC building code, that they're not instructed to inspect these. So basically, if there was a fire, if there was a problem, they would be called out just like a normal house fire, but they cannot go and inspect them to be to a certain standard because it's not within their restrictions in their bylaws.
And Interior Health?
I did get an email from Interior Health. They said they were going to look into it because it was one of the first times they had been asked. And at this time, I'm still to receive a follow-up email.
Thank you. Councilor Bett?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Like Councillor Peak, I think this is, an interesting opportunity to house a family member on a property on a short-term basis, acknowledging that sometimes when a family member needs to move onto a property, that needs to happen sometimes immediately, and that the housing solution might not come for, even if you want to build reasonably and can afford it, it still takes time for permits and processes to move forward, even if it's the right time for that family member to move onto the parcel. So I can see where the bylaws come from. I think that the information and the case that came from Vernon was very public, and it's talking about trying to find alternate solutions to housing people in this housing crisis when there's just not a lot available. And I think it's interesting that the APC Advisory Planning Committee also recommend that we consider recreational vehicles and tiny homes in similar structures in a reasonable fashion to be used in our district, because that's something that I believe would be worthy of our time to look at as an option, especially because of the reduced costs affiliated with some of these structures. So for that reason, I can see a 3-year temporary use permit.
Councilor Nelson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On the structure that's built over it, there's no permit pulled on that. So if it doesn't pass building inspection, number one, is there going to be a double permit fee issued because it was built without a permit?
To your worship, to Councillor Van Alphen, yes, most likely, yeah. Because this is an enforcement file as well, so. I think that would be reasonable.
You might, may I follow up? It's a concern. It's, I read the article from the Vernon Morning Star. I mean, and I don't disagree with some of the comments around the table. My concern is, again, this one's based on a complaint. There are several of these situations in our community of RVs on farmland. How are they hooked up? Like, some of them have just gone ahead and put their own septic systems in, blah, blah, blah. If we're going to address these, I think we need to address the entire community. If we're going to allow this, then how do we do this? How do we change our bylaw to say, we just can't keep dealing with one-off complaints, type situations, because I know of 5 on my way home. So they're there. But if nobody complains, they'll stay there, which is, I don't have a problem, but are they being installed correctly? That's my problem, so, here with a 3-year TUP, I can go along that, but until we get a letter from Interior Health, I would put a motion forward to table it until we see the letter that Interior Health says the septic system is appropriate to accommodate this facility. But that's just my comment.
Mr. Donovan?
If I may provide some feedback to Councillor Van Alphen's concern there with regards to change or suggestion of change the entire bylaw to accommodate this, and it's definitely an option of councils. I do think that this approach of using temporary use permits could be a method of bringing some of those existing situations into compliance with our bylaws. This is one way we're bringing forward this application tonight, could be replicated for other applications in the future. And what it does afford council to have is flexibility on the controls that you have at your disposal through a discretionary process in the issuance of a temporary use permit to list conditions in that permit of what must be complied with in order for it to be granted approval. And one of which is Interior Health, just an FYI, like in the draft covenant or draft permit we have before council tonight, there is a condition to ensure that there's an Interior Health inspection of the septic and make sure that there's capacity. There's also another condition to ensure that those structures either receive a building permit or are removed from the structure. So if it's something that's included within our zoning bylaw, then we would lose those tools. Keep in mind that a recreational vehicle is not a building. We do not require a building permit. There's no other mechanism we have to go through a review process with these other than perhaps through the issuance of a temporary use permit. So from my perspective as the planner for the community, I think this is an effective way of dealing with this type of application.
Yeah, I think we do have to deal them as one-offs. I think they're all quite different, whether they're connected to septic or not, and that sort of thing. But anyway, you want to follow up?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate your comment. Instead of waiting for a complaint, the ones that we're aware of that we're driving by every day, staff drives by them as much as I do, a notice saying, we know you have this, you have X amount of time to come forward and ask for a TUP. At least bring them into some type of compliance instead of just them going ahead and having their makeshift septic system or what have you, just to try to clean it up before it gets too carried away and we end up into a situation like Vernon where we're the bad guys. And I don't think we're the bad guys. I think we just want to keep it, and I'm not disagreeing. There's options out there for affordable housing. This is possibly one of them, but how do we do it correctly? Saving the environment plus safety and all those things for all the neighborhood. Thank you.
Councillor Turner?
How many TUPs do we have of this type? Would this be like this type exactly, like this would be kind of one of the first, right?
To your worship, to Councillor Trainer. Yes, this is I think the first of this nature that we're bringing forward.
Okay, I'm in support of this because I think that we can learn from this as well by bringing it forward and bringing this structure into compliance where we can. I think it is an opportunity for us to learn, and I agree with Councillor Van Elfen about enforcing this all over Summerland, but I think we also have to think about our bylaw capacity. And so I totally support it, but I think that needs to be something that we discuss as well at strategic planning in terms of how much we want to add to our bylaw capacity and which kinds of bylaws we really want enforced. But yeah, I'm in support of this. I think 3 years is fair. And I think that this will help us in future cases when other TUPs come up to look back at this one and see how this one is going and possibly even get feedback from the landowners.
So when in 2010, when the septic was installed for the workshop, presumably it was inspected at that time, but it would have been for the workshop use, which is necessarily the same thing as residential use. Is that fair to say?
Yes, to the mayor. Yeah, and that's why we've included these terms and conditions. As I said, there's 6 specific ones. So we have asked, the applicants have actually given me the specific system that was included. And we've asked them just to bring them in as part of the terms and conditions to prove that it was certified at the time, and that it can consume and hold the consumption of the toilet in the workshop and also the toilet in the RV. So this is where we can tailor make this with our terms and conditions, and we've been quite stringent and thoughtful about it and tried to cover all of those safety measures with having the electric looked at and also the septic field to be inspected as well.
Councillor Peak.
Thank you very kindly, Your Worship. I do want to comment on the fact that the AAPC and the Advisory Planning Commission and the Agriculture Advisory Committee concurred in this instance, and I appreciate the discussion that was had at the Advisory Planning Commission regarding tiny homes and similar structures to be used within the zoning bylaw. I think that, again, for us is an opportunity, and I think it's something that we should be considering as well. But I'm very pleased that both these bodies had a chance to review this application prior to it coming to council. Our consultation with our public via these committees is really important to me.
So as says in the report, this has come to the RDS. In fact, it's come to the RDS several times, these kind of things. In fact, we have another one coming this week to the RDS. Each time the administrative recommendation for these is to deny the TUPs. And the reasons for that are basically twofolds. One is that they're unsuitable and unhealthy for long-term occupancy. And the Canadian Recreation Vehicle Association, the association that represents RV manufacturers, it goes out of their way to say that they're designed for recreational camping, travel, or seasonal use. They're not for long-term use. And people living them is kind of, they see as damaging their reputation. And the other concern is proper sewage disposal. And it's all the RDS, whenever it comes to the RDS, we do get a interior health report. And every single time interior health comments that RVs don't meet standards for long-term residential use, and they may be potential health hazards. So when it comes to the RDS, it's municipal directors don't have a vote on this. It's a rural vote. It's one of the quirks of the regional districts. But there's never really much of a strong consensus on the board. People are split. And what makes it difficult is the housing crisis. And if there was no housing crisis, I don't think they would ever be allowed. They would ever get through. And so what the RDUS board usually settles on is a 1-year TUP because they don't want to put anybody out in the street, especially in the wintertime. And so it's basically give the person who's living there time to get things in order. So with that in mind, I would certainly support a 1-year or even 18 months TUP. I understand you can only apply for a 1-year or 3-year, but we're able to set it for whatever we want. We don't have to say 1 year or 3 years. Is that correct? We can make it 2. I seem to remember we for what's now Oasis, we made that a 2-year TUP when they applied. So I think we could set it for less than 3 years and more than 1 year if we so choose. And that's kind of what I would personally side towards, something like 18 months or something like that. Just so that they don't have to face a winter with wondering where they're going to live. I think Councillor Trainer, then Councillor Peak.
In terms of living in an RV, down in Trout Creek, there's an RV park where people live in RVs year round, and they have been for years. Like some of those RVs have been there for, I've been in Trout Creek 12 years and they've been there 12 years and people live in them, and that place is full and it provides housing for a lot of people because that's all that they can afford. And so, I realize that Interior Health says that, but we have people living in RVs that are successfully doing it. So, that's what's going on down there. In terms of the 1 to 3 years, I hear where you're coming from, but in this case, I'm okay with 3 years just because of the 3 years goes by pretty quick. And the amount of work that, they have to get a building permit for that little structure over top. And, what Councillor Betts had said earlier in terms of finding housing at this time, it's difficult to find it in a year sometimes. So I think that 3 years is fair. That gives a person living there, reasonable amount of time. Plus it kind of makes up for the amount of work that they're going to have to put in to bring it to where we require those 6 points that Shannon Toohey had talked about in terms of the requirements. So I would keep it at 3.
Councillor Peak.
I don't need to repeat some of what my fellow councillor said because I do agree with the remarks. I also look at the fact that within that 3 years, this household may decide to do an enlargement on the house to accommodate the son. I mean, there could be all kinds of things that become possible. So I don't have a difficulty with the 3 years. I understand why Interior Health has what they say and why they say it. But people live in their cars. There are people living in their cars right now. It would be safer for them to be in an RV that's hooked up to a septic system. I think there's reasons you do things. So 3 years is not a difficulty for me.
Councillor Barkwell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would go with the 3-year TUP as well, because it seems to me it's very unlikely that a septic system designed for a workshop would be adequate for what's going to be now a workshop and the living quarters. And so the upgrade could be quite expensive. It has to be stamped by a professional with an ATSSBC designation, whatever it is. Interior Health only accepts the design and installation plans for filing. So it's not really, they rely on the qualifications of it's a professional approval model, but it will be, could be quite pricey. And so at least you can amortize that expense over 3 years instead of a 1 year. And maybe it'll, with eventually maybe a secondary suite in the house hooked up to it or something, and then it'll be used for some future use.
Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question through to our Director of Planning. For temporary farm workers accommodation, can I use an RV? Or does it have to be a CSA approved ATCO trailer?
Through your worship to Councillor Van Alphen. So that's a different type of use and within the agricultural land reserve use regulation. It's temporary farm worker housing. It does require usually an application to the ALC. From the ALC's perspective, is what Ms. Shannon Tui has presented, an RV, if it's there for the purposes of a residence, whether it's a primary or secondary residence, is allowed. So the temporary farm worker housing stream does have a separate approval process. And from my experience, I haven't seen RVs been utilized for that type of an application to the ALC. So I'm not too sure if the ALC would approve it. Typically there's usually more than one bedroom. There's multiple bedrooms, multiple workers that are employed on site, that they sharing a common facility. So, and that's the way those structures are typically designed. So I don't think the ALC would look favorably on if there was like multiple RVs in the form of a campground for temporary farm worker accommodation. But I can't comment on behalf of the ALC. I'm not too sure, but I haven't seen it be tested in my experience in the South Okanagan.
Okay, thank you. So if there's no further discussion, if somebody could like to bring a motion forward, Councillor Peak.
May I do so? I'll bring that motion forward as recommended through staff.
Okay, and are there any conditions to this on this, or as it is, or no?
To the mayor. This is the resolution here, and then within the permit, you have the terms and conditions.
Okay, thank you. And just to remind us what the key points are for those?
Certainly. They are that the terms and conditions are that they are allowed to use the recreational vehicle for 3 years. And that included in the permit, it will be allowed to be sited outside of the farm home plate as it is. That it should be of the series classification laid out in the standards, which is CSA Z240. And the applicant is to bring that forward. Within 1 month of approval of the permit, the applicant must confirm appropriate documentation for the electrical connection for the RV. And within 1 month of approval of this permit, the applicant must submit a building permit for the structure surrounding the RV. Within 1 month of approval of the permit, the applicant must confirm appropriate septic disposal capacity by submitting one of the following: records of the filing and letter of certification for the existing septic disposal system, and if filing documents cannot be produced, record of a compliance inspection completed by an authorised practitioner, confirming that the current septic disposal system can handle the flow and volume produced by the RV.
Okay, and if they don't file within the 1 month period of any of those things, what happens?
Yeah, so it's a good question. Like the conditions of the permit are what grants the permit approval process. So if they don't move forward with these conditions, then we would consider them in breach of the temporary use permit and therefore non-compliant with our zoning bylaw. And then we could then enforce on our zoning bylaw regulation that for use contrary to the zoning bylaw. Hopefully it doesn't go down that path, but we would have tools at our disposal that if these conditions weren't met, we could enforce upon.
Okay. Anything else, anybody? I'll call the question. Sorry, Councillor Barkwell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would just say that I think it's, again, that it's extremely unlikely that the septic system for a workshop would meet the requirements for accommodation, permanent accommodation, or at least. And so 1 month isn't a practical length of time for them to get the necessary permits for any septic system, unless by chance I'm wrong and there's somebody that would approve for accommodation what is just a workshop septic system. So, I would give them more time. That's all for that part, because it could be quite necessary.
So, well, you want to put something on the, how would we corporate officer go about doing that?
To the mayor, there could be a motion to amend to add that as a condition of the permit, and then the procedure be to vote on the amendment and then the main motion.
Councillor Barkley, you want to put that as amendment to the motion to 3 months for the septic?
Yes, I'll put forward a motion that the requirement of the permit is that they get approved system filing returned from Interior Health, because that's how it works. You file it and then they send a notice back saying they've accepted it within 3 months of the application.
Why don't you just say they can't do it until
It's received.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, but they're there now. I mean, what is it?
They're there now, so that doesn't work.
Yeah.
Okay, do you have a seconder for that? Councillor Trainer, any discussion on the amendment? Councillor Betts?
I would just like to thank Councillor Barkwell for his expertise in the septic field, so that, well, come on now. But I think that that's a useful amendment, and kind of that is really responding to the realities of what our residents are going to face.
Yeah, he's the #1 counselor in the #2 business. Okay, so I'll call the question on the amendment. All in favor of the amendment? And that carries, none opposed. And now, any further discussion on the resolution as amended? Call the question, all in favor? And I'm opposed. So that's, everyone except me in favor. That motion carries. Move to item 9.2, zoning bylaw updates. Mr. Dolvett.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just wait for my slides. Great, thanks, John. So I'm excited to be before council tonight to present our draft zoning bylaw amendments for 2024. Had lots of discussion to get to this point tonight with the community and with council and with other key stakeholders. Most of these changes deal with Bill 44, which has been a lot of publicity on. That's the largest piece of legislation that's been bestowed to us by the province of BC in the fall sitting of last year of the legislature, that deals specifically with housing and land use within the District of Summerland. And on top of that as well, we have also proposed changes to our zoning bylaw with regards to Bill 35, which is the Short-Term Rental Accommodations Act, as well as the parking and loading section of the district zoning bylaw and other administrative amendments we try to do on an annual basis to ensure that our zoning bylaw is being kept up to date. So as a bit of a refresher for council and for the public on Bill 44, it's referred to by us planners as the small scale multi-unit housing legislation, or SMA for short. The intent of this legislative changes was to encourage missing middle, quote unquote, housing across all of the single family zoned residential areas of BC that are serviced. So when we talk about missing middle housing, it's triplexes, duplexes, townhousing, formats of housing within these traditional single family zoned areas. And just to kind of pretend to wear up my hat of being a province of BC bureaucrat, the intent was because the most of the single family residential zone land in BC is it equals about 85% of all serviced privately owned residential land in BC. And as well, on top of that, the single detached housing format, so having one house on top of one piece of parcel, is increasingly unattainable and unaffordable for the majority of British Columbians. And so for those two reasons combined is the reason why this legislation has come to us from the province. So, and there's a belief that multi-unit forms of housing will are harder to construct due to the regulatory barriers as well, but can be cheaper for people to enter into the housing market at the front end. So that was another reason for this legislation. Thankfully, in the legislation, when we saw it initially, when it was released in the fall, linked where the legislation applies to the urban containment boundaries. And also, thankfully, we already had an urban containment boundary established within our official community plan. So this map here identifies the areas that are currently within the district's urban containment boundary. Just to highlight them as overview: downtown, western part of Summerland, including Deer Ridge, south along South Victoria Road. Then you have Lower Town, which includes Sully Road and Peach Orchard Road. And then there's two pockets there for Unisys and Pierre Drive, and then another pocket for the Trout Creek community. So specifically, how this legislation restricts our zoning bylaw is by stating that for all single family and duplex zones within those areas I just identified, they must now allow for up to 4 residential units if the 4 criteria are met. If it's within the urban containment boundary, which I've already identified, land connected to utility systems, land which includes water and sewer, not one or the other, has to have both. Land zoned for lot sizes less than 4,050 square meters, and a parcel of land that's less than 4,050 square meters. So what does this mean for our regulations? So staff initially reviewed as to which zones would be subject to the Bill 44, and there are 6 identified zones that we have to now change. RSD1, RSD1I, it's our intensification zone for single family, RSD2, RSD3, RDH is our duplex housing zone, and residential strata housing, which is RSH, is also applicable. So when reviewing these 6 residential zones, we wanted to also do some consolidation at the same time and make 3 new residential zones we were referring to as the residential urban zones, to replace those existing as 6 single family and duplex zones within our zoning bylaw. Additionally, which I'll get into a little more detail, we're adding a new use definition called multi-unit housing, again, to try to encourage that missing middle format of housing in these areas. And so that's then also provides some flexibility in our zoning bylaw as to how that multi-unit housing can be achieved on a single family parcel. There's also proposed increases to height, density, reduce setbacks. increasing the secondary suite and carriage house sizes as another recommendation of these amendments. And then finally, a parking review as well to ensure that a minimum of 4 units, or sorry, a maximum of 4 units could be built in these existing single family residential areas. So just to go a little deeper into the new definition here, starting with multi-unit housing means a building containing two to 4 dwelling units divided either horizontally or vertically by a common party wall, and each dwelling having a separate entrance, but not necessarily a grade. So the intent with that new use definition is to not label that a duplex or a triplex or a townhouse 4-unit building. There could be many various types of combinations of achieving the 2 to 4 residential units. And that image on the right-hand side of the screen was actually provided to us by the province of BC. It has been on a lot of their publication. They're trying to encourage this flexibility for how 3 to 4 units can be added to a single family residential lot. And in fact, they are still planning to provide us prescribed designs that can be easily applied for building permit to add additional residential housing density in these areas. And so we didn't want to restrict those standardized designs coming forward from the province. So this multi-unit housing definition is intended to accommodate all of that different type of housing product that would be up to 2 to 4 dwelling units on a single family parcel. And then lastly, the second use definition here is urban containment boundary. That's a definitional to just link the zoning bylaw to the urban containment boundary that we've already established in our official community plan. Now to go over a bit of an overview with the proposed zones themselves, starting with RU1 zone. The RU1 zone is our most compact residential urban zone that is targeted for infill areas of the community. So those areas in and around the downtown core primarily, as well as an area in the lower town, which I'll get into why that area as well. So this zone will accommodate single detached multi-unit housing and duplex housing, a minimum parcel size of 260 square meters, a minimum parcel width of 11 meters, but that could even scrunch further to 7.5 meters if there is lane access. So, and a good example of that we're following with this zone is in the community is those existing houses across from the middle school, and that's that image on the right-hand side there. Those are 7.5 meter lots. There's secondary suites for each one of those houses. There's 2 units per property. That's the type of housing we can encourage in these compact residential areas in and around the downtown core. In order to accommodate up to 4 units, though, we have to increase height. And that's, I think, the majority of the theme that you'll see in these proposed amendments. 3 stories is going to be the new maximum for RU1. And a reduced side yard as well of 4 feet, which is reduced down from 1.5 meters. Questions? Sorry.
Councillor Chair?
Those houses that are across from the high school, are those considered 3 stories or 2?
That's 2 stories.
That's 2.
Yeah.
Okay, so under this new bylaw, we could go up another story?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Peak?
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Would this be possible in the lower town area because we have back lanes? So this kind of infill RU1 would be able to work there as well?
Yeah, through your worship to Councillor Peak. Thank you for that question. I will go into where specifically these zones are going to be located in the presentation, but yes, the intent is for the RU1 zone is to also apply down to Lower Town because we have existing 7.5 meter lots already subdivided out there. They're already a narrow lot size that we have existing historical in the community here. And most of those lots have lane access. Yeah, so it's something that we're wanting to also see placed in that area as well. Something unique as well, if I can keep moving forward. for the zone is, which is not the same for the other two zones that we have proposed, is a maximum single detached housing floor area of 200 square meters. And the intent for this regulation is to encourage more multi-unit housing forms in these areas that are really close to our downtown core, where we want to see perhaps some more density that are in close proximity of walking to services within our downtown core. This isn't directly in the downtown core area. These are the surrounding areas. But the worst case scenario is that we have a large lot that's zoned this property and they put a 6,000 or 5,000 square foot house for one family on that property where it could be developed further with additional units. So we want to restrict that with this 200 square meter. So we had our consultant provide some schematics as to how this could be developed for each of the zones. So here's just an example for the residential urban infill zone, RU1, where there's lane access that could be parking from the rear and from the front with a 1.2 meter setbacks. There's a couple different formats here shown. Moving on to residential urban 2 zone. So to explain this one, this is most similar to our current standard single family residential zoned lot within the district of Summerland. Most of our residential areas are zoned RSD1, which is a 460 square meter parcel size and allows for a 12 meter minimum parcel width. So we've kept those two regulations the same for the RU2 zone, and most of the areas that are being rezoned to RE2 are the existing RSD1 areas of the community. So in terms of parcel size and width, there should be no real changes from what's existing now. The big change for these areas will be density and height. So again, we are required to provide for up to 4 dwelling units on these parcels. And we cannot restrict the development of 4 dwellings on a parcel either through height or setbacks. The province has stated that. And so in order to allow for 4 dwelling units, we have increased height to go up to 3 stories. And so that's kind of the bigger change here in these areas. It's going from 2 stories to 3 stories. And again, in order to accommodate that density, going from 1 to 4 dwelling units on these parcels. So just another example of how for a development could be configured on a residential urban 2 lot. This is looks like a triplex multi-unit building with a unit on each floor, parking in behind the building through a lane access on the side, just as an example. And the last residential suburban zone is, sorry, question, yeah?
But there'd be nothing stopping anybody from coming along, building a single 3-story, single detached house.
That's correct, yeah, that's right. For the residential suburban zone, this is our last residential suburban zone. A couple of differences with this zone compared to the RU1 proposed zone as well as RU2. This area restricts multi-unit housing from being a permitted use to start. So we are stating that single detached housing and duplex housing is permitted, but not multi-unit housing. These areas are more outlying areas of the community. Also some hillside situations where we don't want to be encouraging those multi-unit formats of housing. And they have larger parcel sizes of 800 square meters as well as 18-meter widths. And because of that larger parcel size, we can spread out that density. We still are required to allow for up to 4 dwelling units, but we can accommodate those 4 dwelling units through a house and a secondary suite. And again, a carriage house and maybe a second carriage house and have multiple buildings constructed on the property that are at 2-story level height versus 3 stories. And so that's another reason why in this proposed zone, we are recommending that we keep height fixed at 2 stories because of that larger parcel size. This is also the majority of Trail Creek, and which I'll get into here in the next slide, and also keeping our yard setbacks pretty similar to what they are today. And here's just an example here of a residential suburban zone. Again, an example here, this is a house. Maybe it has a suite underneath it in the basement, and then there could be 2 carriage houses in behind the parcel because it is a larger parcel. So where are these zones being proposed to be applied to? Hard to make out, but the gold, browny, orangey color I just circled there is the RU1 areas. So this is just above the downtown core, all the way up to Sinclair Road, is proposed to be rezoned to residential urban infill. Same with the area north of Jubilee Road and along Quinpool. This is another area that has some different types of density already occurring. There's a need perhaps of some revitalization, some areas that are in need for some renewal. So we definitely see some multi-unit housing being something we want to encourage in this area in close proximity to the downtown core. And then the other area, as Councillor Peak mentioned, is the Lower Town area, where we have these existing 7.5 meter wide lots that we have to deal with in that community, and to still allow for development to occur in that area. Question?
Councillor Peak?
Through your worship, is the beach, the other one out there down on Lakeshore, can't think of the name, but Crescent Beach, is that another area that has narrower lots and would be allowed?
Your worship, to Councillor Peak, that's actually my next slide to show you that area, but it's a bit unique, Crescent Beach. It doesn't have compact lots. It's kind of our standard RSD1 lot size, but it's outside of our urban containment boundary. So that's why it's a bit unique. I will talk a bit about that in the next slide. But I do want to point out here as well, all of the darker yellow, I guess I would say, colored areas here, instead of the pale yellow, is the RU2 zoned area. So again, that is the areas where we are recommending we increase height from 2 to 3 stories. It's replacing the standard RSD1 zone that we currently have in place. The outlying areas to the west of the downtown, South Victoria Road, and then Lower Town going down Peach Orchard and Sully Road, those lots. So I mentioned other pocket areas. So Trail Creek, you can see majority of Trail Creek is going to be RU3 in that pale yellow color. There are, though, some existing developments that have a smaller parcel size, like Lighthouse Landing. It's Nixon Road development as well, that we are proposing to go to RU2 strictly because of their parcel sizes being smaller than the build out of Trail Creek. Sumac Ridge and Crescent Beach, both those areas are located outside of our urban containment boundary. So they don't require to be up to 4 residential units on those properties. For that reason, we've constructed the RU3 zone to be flexible, that it can be applied to an existing residential area outside the urban containment boundary, and only allow up to 3 residential units, not 4. And that could be a carriage house and a suite, as an example.
Councillor Benelson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through to our Director of Planning. So Sumac Ridge is a strata development that's not on municipal sewer. It's on its own treatment plant. So I thought it had to be, both services had to be offered, and we're only offering one, water. So how can it qualify? Just being that it's like I say, it's a strata, if that sewer system that they maintain fails, who's to say that they don't come to the district of Summerland looking for us to take it over. You know, I'm just concerned because it's not meeting the criteria in my mind.
Through your worship, to Councillor Van Alphen. Yeah, you're correct. This area, it would not be subject to Bill 44 because it's, first of all, it's outside the urban containment boundary. Second of all, it's on a private septic system. So yeah, for those two criteria, it wouldn't need to allow up to 4 residential units. Like I said, that's the reason why we're going to 3 only. And unfortunately, the way Sumac Ridge was developed, it had existing zoning rights in place. It's not the same as the residential strata housing that we have in other stratas throughout the community. It had an RSD3 zone in place, which allowed for kind of the similar type of lot size, parcel size, single families, as well as a carriage house and a secondary suite as currently today. And so we were trying to find the right type of situation to kind of replicate what's there today. If it was developed today, I would not have recommended it to be developed this way. And unfortunately, it's an existing situation with existing property rights that I have to accommodate. And that's the reason why it's being proposed as RU3 for council's benefit. Yeah. The last area there is Unisys Pierre Drive. This is primarily going to be RU2, given that it is an urban containment boundary. It's zoned RSD1. They're smaller parcel size, already built out. There is some further areas of this area that still has to be developed, but is already zoned residential. So that could be developed into RU2 residential housing in the future. And for that reason, it's being maintained as is as well. Okay, one thing that we were able to achieve with our consultant that was helping us with these amendments was to actually look at the development potential of lots within the community of Summerland, and specifically around the downtown core, because that's where there's most potential for redevelopment occurring. And so they did an analysis, and that's where you see the different pink and purple shading here as to the range of developability based on a number of factors: the age of the structures on the property, the assessed value in terms of the improvement value that's on that property. So if there's low improvement value, then there's more of an economic incentive to redevelop that land for higher value use. And so the areas that are darkest in color are the most of potential opportunity for redevelopment in the future. And so out of all of the properties analyzed, there was, I think, 200 parcels looked at. Around based on the city of Kelowna's analysis of how many lots actually moved forward with redevelopment based on upzoning to their RU7 zoning, that was the one that they achieved within their infill areas. Around 25% of parcels will move forward with redevelopment. So we use that 25% to do a little bit of scenario analysis here as to where development could occur or might be likely to occur in the future. And you can see that in those black dots on this image here. And that represents about 50 parcels that could be redeveloped in the future based on the development potential of our zoning amendments and also what's there currently on the property. So you can see that most of the areas are either north of the downtown core area along Quinpool Road, along Dunson Crescent there's some potential redevelopment, and then scattered areas that are above the downtown core up to Sinclair Road. You can see some happening, and definitely this is what we're seeing from applications being submitted from our office as well. We just went through a rezoning for Ward Street, which is one of those areas identified as well as high potential. So we're going to continue analyzing this to inform our infrastructure planning as we move forward with these zoning bylaw amendments.
So what can is there any kind of concern that in RU1 and RU2, that these lots will just become attractive for people building large single houses, 3-story houses, and it completely defeats the purpose of trying to encourage density? And then it changes the complexion of the community as well, because you'll have, all of a sudden, you got these 3-story single detached houses on lots where that was not the idea, but I could see it happening. So is it possible to, say 3 stories if you're going to build multi-unit, but keep it at 2 stories if your intention is to build a single unit? Is that allowable? And what would be the pros or cons of doing that?
To the mayor, to answer that question, it is definitely possible to construct the zoning bylaw that way. I think there is risk that could happen in the future if there's someone wanting to put a large scale single family house with 3 stories. We have tried to limit that in the RU1 zone specifically because we are wanting to encourage more multi-unit housing forms within those specific areas of RU1. And we're doing that through the floor area size and restricting the size of a single family house. But, you could construct it so that it's 3 if it's a certain number of density that's being proposed. That isn't what these draft amendments though are currently constructed.
Councilor Beth?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it's a really interesting point. And I recall the previous conversation about the density, and Councillor Patton was concerned about the 200-meter squared limitation and how that would work. But I actually think that if it was a new building was designed as a single family home to be limited to 2 stories where other multi-unit buildings could be allowed the third, I can see that would achieve be enough of an incentive to achieve that extra housing where it might not otherwise, where somebody might choose to build something larger themselves. Now, I understand that's not in the draft amendment or in the draft proposal today. So what implication is there for the timeline, since we're on a very tight timeline, if something like that was to come to the table?
We can definitely make tweaks to the zoning bylaw amendment and that's being before council tonight and come back at the next meeting on June 11th. Most likely we would require a special meeting to be held before June 30th to adopt the zoning bylaw amendments before June 30th. And because that is our only meeting in June, is June 11th. So we could definitely talk with the corporate service department if that's what council so chooses. I do want to say one more thing, if I can, on regards to this idea of, I do really strongly believe that there will be a strong incentive for developers, especially when you're looking at construction costs of adding 3 stories, to try to build more units on the property, because there's value in doing that in terms of being able to get that equity through sale. So if you are looking to redevelop a property, you're going to be encouraged to increase the number of units on that property versus keeping it at 1 within those areas. But you might have certain people that just want to build a gigantic house as well.
Though, it's not that there's anything wrong with single detached houses. I live in one, and most of us do. But for that core in the downtown area where we want to build density, that's we need to that's where we need to actually encourage density to happen where we want it to happen, and not be seen as a place where you can, the idea of living in a single detached house right downtown where you can walk to is I think it'd be very appealing to a lot of people. So But that's not really how we envision the community developing. So it's kind of like what's the unintended consequences, you know? So that's why I kind of put that out there. But I'd like to hear what the rest of council has. Thanks for that. So, Councillor Peak.
I have no difficulty in looking for a modification to work to see what our staff would put forward to make that possible.
Councillor Betts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think another just point in the discussion is that I believe our Director of Development Services, if you can correct me if I'm wrong, but if you want to build with a third story, it does require additional sprinkler systems or the requirement of sprinkler systems in your build. Yeah, that's correct. So, I mean, there are significant added costs to go to a third story. So if somebody just wants a single family home and they want to live downtown, they can achieve that without having to tear down and rebuild to 3 stories. You know, I think you might have some of that. I'm still willing to entertain the notion, absolutely, but it's cost prohibitive to go to 3 stories. You need to really want to have that extra story. It'd be more beneficial to build it with units and sell them off when you don't need them. Just my opinion.
Okay. Carry on. I don't know where to go for that, but we'll carry on.
Yeah, I'll keep going. So moving on now to our other zones and what's happening with our other zones. And it's a bit of a ripple effect because of the new residential urban zones. And also because we're increasing 2 things, height and density within the residential urban area, zoned areas. We had to look at the residential medium density, RMD zone, as well as the residential high density zone. For both these current zones, we are recommending changes for density, which is our floor area ratio, which we calculate density, and then also maximum height from 3 stories currently allowed only in the residential medium density to be increased to 4 stories. Again, because we now are allowing 3 stories within some of the single family residential areas of the community. And then similarly for the residential high density, increasing floor area ratio and also going from 4 stories to 6 stories. And keep in mind for the residential high density zone, we don't have a lot of parcels within our community that's actually zoned RHD, our residential high density. The majority of them are in and around the downtown core. So which is an area where we have policy recommendation through the Downtown Neighborhood Action Plan to try to increase density as well. So it is meeting that goal as well, is to increase that max height and floor area ratio to the height going from 4 to 6 stories. And something unique, again, kind of on this theme of the risk of underbuilding in this area. As mentioned, we don't have too many parcels that are zoned residential high density. The risk is that they get underdeveloped in a close proximity to the downtown core. So we are putting a minimum floor height here of 3 stories for the residential high density. So we're saying that, you know, if you want to do a 2-story product, it's not going to be suitable for that area. Another point with regards to residential medium density, I'm just kind of jumping back up to that one. I mentioned the residential strata housing zone. It's a bit unique. These are for strata housing developments within our community that are existing. They are currently designated residential medium density within our official community plan. So in order to accommodate that zone specifically, we looked at the cluster housing definition in the RMD zone, and that does allow for single family developments that are in a cluster format, as well as duplex housing. And that's the same use definition that the Lake House development has applied for as an example. That's a dense, compact kind of form of single family strata development. And so we recommend that we consolidate the residential strata housing zone into the residential medium density zone. And for that reason, we're introducing new regulations for bare land stratas specifically within the zone. And so that you'll see that as well in the draft amendments. So other changes for Bill 44. again, a bit of a ripple effect, because we are increasing height to 3 stories. We're also recommending that we increase accessory building height from 1 story to 2 stories, except for the RU3 zone. Again, that's being maintained at 2 stories, so that wouldn't change. We just, as a side note, we already allow carriage houses to be sited above a garage unit up to 2 stories. So that was something that we felt was fairly consistent with what's currently allowed within the zoning bylaw. We are also introducing secondary suites to be an allowed unit now within a duplex housing product or townhousing units. This is a change made a few years ago under the BC Building Code that is permitted. Our bylaw still restricted it up until this point. But again, because we're allowing up to 4 residential units on a parcel, there's no reason why we couldn't encourage a secondary suite to be one of those units if it's a duplex building, for example. Another change here is removing the secondary suite size. We currently have a restriction of 90 square meters. But again, there's not much difference between a house with a secondary suite and a duplex if you're going to rebuild and build a duplex, which we are now allowing within these areas. So for that reason, we're recommending we remove that maximum size, but it cannot be larger than the principal dwelling. And as well, again, to allow for up to 4 residential units is secondary suites and carriage houses are allowed on the same lot. So that was all Bill 44. So a lot of information there. Happy to take more questions on that as we move forward. Now, the rest of the presentation here deal with other changes happening with our zoning bylaw for other tweaks and also legislation coming from the province. This one in particular is for Bill 35 for short-term rentals. Not a lot is changing with our zoning bylaw for short-term rentals. The new legislation from the province still allows an STR as a bed and breakfast format or a secondary suite or an accessory dwelling unit, which our bylaw previously allowed as well. And also principal residence being in a suite, and then short-term rentaling the main house as another option, as a third option that can still be applied for. The big difference from what we currently had in our zoning bylaw and what the province has now provided in Bill 35 is that we used to allow a third-party operator to be the operator of that short-term rental and not be actually present on the property. So you were required to have a long-term tenant on that property. It didn't need to be the operator of the short-term rental. You could just rent out a long-term unit and then have a short-term rental unit, and then you can operate it, or you can have a company operate on your behalf. That option now has been removed by Bill 35. Bill 35 has specifically stating that the principal resident on the property has to be the operator. So we are recommending we also remove that as an option for short-term rental license, is the use of an offsite management company.
Councillor Chair.
When again does this Bill 35 come into effect?
It already is.
It is now. Okay. If a resident has a complaint about a property on their street that may be in violation of this, can they report it to the province, or do they only report it to the municipality?
Your worship, to Councillor Trainer, yes, they can do both. Specifically, if it's related to one of our bylaws, like a noise bylaw violation, we have a good neighbor bylaw as well. Other types of nuisance issues that would probably be better directed to our bylaw enforcement team. The big catch that the province is now putting in place for operators and in order to list on a third-party listing agency is a business license being in place. And so that's where we have now, I think, a lot more tools from the province to ensure that every short-term rental operator will have a business license in place. But, there are still going to be issues with short-term rental operators happening in the community. Again, if it's related to those nuisance issues, I would probably contact our office.
Okay, so just to clarify then, listing places like Airbnb and VRBO, they are now required by the province to, with a listing, the listing must accompany a business license? Okay, and is the province enforcing that, or how are they regulating that?
Through your worship, to Councillor Turner, yes, the province is enforcing that for a number of different ways. They are requiring the listing to show the business license number on the actual listing before it's advertised, and then they're not they have a little bit more tools at our disposal. They are contacting Airbnb and VRBO directly to ensure that those requirements are being followed, ensuring that that license is listed on that listing. Another thing too is perhaps like some get through the cracks where they're putting bunk information as a listing number. We have the ability to report to the province that one of the listings is not in compliance with our license system as well. So we could also report up to a new portal that they've created to say that, yeah, this individual, this listing is not in compliance with our licensing regulations. So there, again, there's some tools there for us on the enforcement side that the province is providing to us. I'll keep moving forward. So other changes with regards to Bill 35, we had a bit of a discrepancy on our definition for a short-term rental. Our previous interpretation and understanding a short-term rental was anything less than a month lease. So we stated anything up to 28 days being a short-term rental stay. However, the Bill 35 is now stating that a short-term rental is anything less than 90 days is considered a short-term rental from their perspective. And so we are recommending we tweak that to also be 90 days so that we're consistent with Bill 35. We are also introducing short-term rentals as an accessory use for our duplex and townhousing units. We used to restrict that. It used to be single-family dwellings only. Again, though, we're opening up townhousing and duplexes through all of our single-family zones, so they could have a short-term rental in one of those units. Key thing here I want to point out, though, is apartments. We are still recommending we restrict apartments from short-term rentals. Is that from our zoning perspective, we already allow that through a hotel. So if a hotel use, if you're wanting to convert an apartment building to a short-term rental type offering, well, you can go through a hotel use rezoning, if perhaps it might be required for your current zoning to consider that type of use in that location. And then lastly here, we are also adding the short-term rental as an accessory use to the residential medium density zone for the same reason of townhousing being an allowed product that you can have short-term rental in. Okay, that was Bill 35. Again, any questions? I'm happy to take any on those. I'll keep moving forward now to Section 6, parking and loading. So council members, we had a good discussion in the fall with regards to our parking and loading section and trying to achieve the right balance of our minimum parking requirements within our bylaw and reviewing that, as well as the cash in lieu fee of parking. And so we have some recommendations here, starting with the multi-unit duplex townhousing and apartment units. We're recommending we go down to 1 space per unit, specifically because on those existing single family residential lots, it's hard to accommodate up to 4 residential units with only with 2 spaces per required per residential unit, given the limited areas that there are available. This was also a recommendation from the province of BC and a change towards zoning bylaw. The one departure to that, though, is single detached housing. If you're going to have a single detached house, then you should be able to fit 2 parking spaces on your property, which is our current bylaw requirement. The next few items deal with the downtown specifically. So for the apartment housing use within the Central Business 1 zone, we are recommending that we remove the minimum parking requirements for apartment housing. in this zone. The CB1 zone is a mixed use zone. So it requires a commercial component on the ground floor. So any residential above that first story level we would not require, from the zoning bylaw perspective, parking to be provided on site. A couple of reasons for that is that we feel that developers will still be motivated to construct parking, but not be needed to follow our parking requirements within our table. And as well, the built environment of our downtown core, most of the current buildings are built right up to the property line, and it's difficult for any potential redevelopment to accommodate parking when they're looking at demolishing a building and substantially reducing the footprint in order to accommodate parking within our table. And for the most part, a lot of, if it's located within the downtown core, people don't necessarily always need a car. We have great access to services within our downtown core. And so people can access those services through walking and biking through our community. And so the last change here with the cash in lieu fee for parking is recommended to be increased from $3,000 to $13,000. This is going to be applied to only commercial uses. And this is following the same fee that the city of Penticton uses, which we did a benchmark comparison, and that was about the mid-range of the South Okanagan communities that we looked at to come up with that calculation. Any questions on parking and loading before I move on? A lot of information there too. Okay. Next few slides here, I'm not going to go through these in detail, are just administrative updates. If council remembers, and definitely some of the incumbent councillors from our previous council, we've done regular updates to our zoning bylaw to ensure that interpretation is good with our staff as well as for the public, to ensure that the bylaw is being consistent in its application for all applications being moved forward, as well as to reduce the number of variance applications that we're receiving for different areas of the bylaws, where we evaluate our variances that are coming in and look at which areas do we need to tweak based on the number of variances coming in. So the definition updates, the 5 or so first updates in this table are primarily that, in dealing with interpretation and trying to reduce the number of variances. Then we get into some recommendations for our bylaw enforcement team, specifically for shipping containers and unlicensed vehicles. Those two areas are currently unrestricted to have as many shipping containers or unlicensed vehicles on agricultural properties. But we're wanting to restrict that further for agricultural properties less than 1 hectare in size, because they're, for all intents and purposes, primarily being used just for residential purposes anyways. And then as well, we've freed up a little bit of the regulations for agritourism accommodation. We haven't seen a lot of uptake of agritourism accommodation since we introduced this regulation in 2021. So we're making some tweaks to that regulation, specifically to allow for a building or campground use of agritourism accommodation to be outside the farm home plate, with an agrologist report confirming that that area is not suitable for planting. And then also some tweaks with regards to the number of consistent stays is being increased to hopefully encourage more uptake. And I think there's a couple others as well within the bylaw I can dig into. And then the remaining changes there just deal with density bonus provisions. We're recommending that we remove all of the density bonus provisions in the zoning bylaw. So these are the commercial mixed use zones, removing the density bonus provisions because of the new legislative powers that are provided to us from the province for an amenity cost charge, as another mechanism to utilize for seeking payments for amenities within Summerland. So we are recommending that we remove density bonus provisions and we move to an ACC, an amenity cost charge, as part of our review of the DCC bylaw. And then the last change I want to mention here is we've noticed some site-specific rezonings for our industrial zone properties, specifically for contractor services general, as well as storage yard. Those are two uses that, for all intents and purposes, we want to encourage in our industrial areas. For that reason, we are recommending that we add them to our industrial zones as a permitted use. Okay, lots of information there. Question? Thank you.
Councillor P.
Thank you. I think we received letters on this, but I was also approached at the open house for Turning Points by a gentleman who owns commercial property on Victoria. And he feels it is a punishment to people that own those kind of commercial properties that we are restricting it to only 4 stories on that area of our town. And that it would be an incentive if it was 6 stories for people to rebuild and reconstitute and give us great buildings. So I said I would bring that forward as part of the comments.
Your worship, Councillor Peak. So the density changes in terms of our downtown commercial areas are proposed with our official community plan amendments, which are going to be coming forward at our next council meeting. So they're not included in these amendments per se. But we're keeping 4 stories as standard across all central business zone parcels, which Victoria Road is currently zoned Central Business 1. Same with Henry and Kelly Avenue. So nothing is changing from what's currently in our bylaw today with regards to height and density. But fair point, we can definitely have that discussion with the downtown OCP amendments coming forward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And for the benefit of the public here today, we've been digging into these amendments now for a few months, and I'd like to thank our planning department for just a absolute ton of work these last few months. This very thorough presentation is just a snippet of what you guys have been working on, and it's impressive. I actually am wondering something, and I don't know if this has crossed your plate, but it does have to do with our density, and it has to do with how I'm perceiving how we're supposed to be building more houses on the lots that we already have. But one thing that concerns me is the removal of our tree cover in our communities. And I think that should be a concern across BC. But is there discussion of thinking outside the box? I don't know if this is a BC building code kind of thing, but about having green roofs on these new builds, because lots of these new builds have kind of like a flatter style roof. That's the new way. And I think we need to be thinking critically about how to keep temperatures lower in our urban cores. And this is maybe a way to do so. What do you think about that?
Through your worship to Councillor Betts, I think it's an innovative idea. We haven't explored that at the staff level yet. We definitely could. If it's something that council wants to pursue in terms of encouraging and for different types of building structures. I know some communities do have some requirements for green building and green roofs in particular. I think City of Vancouver does have criteria. We would need more research on the right type of mechanism to use. Is it a development permit? Are we going to be doing it through our building bylaw? I'd have to kind of look at what other communities are doing and then dig into it a little further. But it's something to think about for sure. It's a good idea.
Thank you for your comment, Councillor Betts. It brings me back to discussions that we've had at this council table at how important parks are and trees for cooling. So if we're building out to the fringes of a property, is there any opportunity for planting of trees in certain configurations on lots as a requirement? I know they often take trees out because they're doing what they're doing, but for the provision to put it back, I've even had comments put regarding Hunter's Hills. We need trees back to make that cooling, and it's an aesthetic. So I'm wondering if there's an opportunity.
Your worship, to Councillor Peak. So any new development that is for a townhousing or apartment building complex that's for a residential medium density zone or residential high density zone requires a forming character development permit, a multifamily development permit, which we require landscaping to be planted for those projects. And we usually overview those landscaping. We look at the type of species and heat resistance, and we circulate it to our parks department to get their feedback. And we usually do a pretty thorough job of seeing what is being planted and ensure that it's going to survive and for our climate, et cetera, and be a positive impact. For these amendments today, we don't have any forming character in place for these existing single-family residential areas. So we don't have that type of mechanism to screen landscaping, but we do have requirements for site coverage and stormwater drainage must be retained on site. And generally people do plant things on their properties in these yard areas to soak up that water and to deal with the parcel and yard areas within these single family areas. But other than that, we don't have a lot of protection.
Subsequent, so you can require landscaping, whatever. Does it say trees or, I mean, I can put all kinds of lower things and shrubs and drought resistant and whatever, but if it doesn't say trees, I may never decide to put a tree there. And I still think we should be looking at if it's not forming character, I think it behooves me as a counselor to say, I think we should find a mechanism to say we want trees planted.
Yeah, kind of a future strategic planning discussion, I would say. You want to carry on?
Yeah. Thank you. Just to continue on here. So we did bring forward these amendments to our two committees that advise us on land use development process improvement advisory committee. In general, they were in support. A couple of questions with regards to parking, specifically in the downtown core. Mixed opinions on the committee with regards to the parking changes specifically, but ultimately they gave us a resolution to support the proposed amendments as is and for it to proceed to council. Similarly with the advisory planning commission, although the lettering is kind of small. Again, some discussion about where we want to encourage this type of zoning changes, concerns of Bill 44 taking precedence over other types of covenants in place or legislation or even strata regulations. Again, a lot of discussion on parking here as well with the advisory planning commission and the cash in lieu amount. But in general, again, it was support from the APC to move forward with these proposed bylaw amendments. So I do want to mention too, so as Councillor Betts mentioned, we have done a lot of work to get to this point. We've had 2 public open houses. We've had upwards of 80 people attend those open houses. Well, the theme coming from the open houses that a lot of concerns with servicing and infrastructure for the changes of density within these existing single family areas. So transportation, sidewalks, servicing. So that's kind of the next steps of what we will understand at the staff level as well. I mentioned that development potential scenario analysis is one lens that we're going to be doing that. Support for increasing the cash in lieu fees. There was also support from the public for removing the minimum parking requirement for apartments. But there was still some concern of parking availability in the future in the downtown. So they wanted us to monitor that moving forward. Not much feedback on the Bill 35 amendments. I think most people understand that's happening. And then the last comment from as a general summation was that to ensure that the fire department is being consulted for everything that's happening with these proposed amendments, which we have done.
So the open house, I got some questions regarding some people concerned that the community is going to be completely changed because because of Bill 44. But I think, like, what I try to reassure people, yes, it's going to change, but it's not going to change overnight. I think a lot of people just think we're going to be a completely different town overnight. This is a long haul this increased density thing. But because of that concern, people were asking me, why don't we apply for an extension to that June 30th deadline that we're under? And so I know there's only certain conditions you can apply for an extension. And that's whether you're in the process of upgrading your infrastructure, whether your infrastructure would increase a risk for like environmental or safety damage or something, or what they call extraordinary circumstances that you wouldn't be able to make that deadline. So my question is, do any of those things apply to any area within our urban containment boundary that we ought to maybe be looking for an extension for? Deer Ridge, for example, because sewer's not there yet, but it's in the process. Hopefully it will be. But so yeah, we'll be looking at any area that we might want to apply for an extension to?
It's a good question, Your Worship. So the way I've constructed this is that we wouldn't need to apply for an extension because we're trying to accommodate all of the existing zoning that we have in place on these existing areas, that they already have these rights there. If that makes sense. The one area that we could consider would be Deer Ridge, because you're right, it doesn't have sewer there yet. So if that is something council wanted to consider, we could consider for that area. But most of the other areas have urban servicing within the urban containment boundary already, so they have to be in conformance, and there's nothing really that would preclude us to say to the province that we would need to get an extension. It's an option. Keep in mind there are existing zoning rights already in place for Deer Ridge, despite the fact that they don't have sewer there right now. They have zoning rights that allows them to rebuild a single family home, to have a secondary suite. So definitely we're adding more density with the proposed zoning for that area, the RU3 zone. That we're just trying to accommodate what's there right now, which is at the RSC3 zoning. But council can delay that if they so choose.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On the Development Process Improvement Committee, with the changes, why is Hunters Hill neighborhood not included, and can they be included in the future as part of the OCP review?
Is that a question?
Yes. Yes, it is a question.
Through your worship to Councillor Van Alphen. So the reason why Hunters Hill is not included primarily is that they're not included within our urban containment boundary. Their development is a country residential zoning, so not an urban residential zone currently that we're trying to accommodate. With like similar to like Crescent Beach or Sumac Ridge, those are zoned for residential urban currently. But country residential zoning is intended to be outlying areas of the community that perhaps don't have sewer. Some, this one does have sewer, obviously, to get that reduced parcel size. But it wasn't designed to be an urban standard there. And for that reason as well, like there's no curb and gutter on the roadway, et cetera. And, perhaps we should have designed it more to an urban standard in developing the concept for that. So it's definitely something that they would have the ability to come before council in the future if they wanted to make any changes to their zoning or to be added to the urban containment boundary. I think we're going to have a really good discussion with the community as part of the next official community plan review of where we want our growth areas to be moving forward as a community. And we are required to update that urban containment boundary and the OCP by the end of next year, 2025. So, and the province has also dictated to us that we have to allow for a 20-year housing supply within that urban growth boundary as well. So we have to have discussions with the community as to where that growth is going to occur. And perhaps Hunters Hill gets added to that. I don't know for sure, but that would be a good community discussion as part of it. But we didn't want to deal with that situation with just these amendment bylaws that we have to be brought forward for Bill 44. Could be a separate discussion in the future.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I want to thank staff for the way they've gone about this, for the number of open houses that you have made available. I've been to as many as I could be at. And I want to say that every time I listen to it, I learn some other piece. And some of it is I'm trying to forget what I might know about what I already know so I can fix this stuff in my head. So the more times we have the discussion, the better I'm getting at it. And it just makes sense the way you're doing it. So thank you very much for the hard work of your staff and yourself.
Carry on.
Second to last slide. So because of all of these zoning bylaw amendments, we had to make a couple of tweaks to two other regulatory bylaws related to the zoning bylaw amendments. The first of which is our driveway access bylaw. Right now, we have a restriction to limit only one driveway access per single family residential lot, urban residential zoning only. But because of Bill 44, we're going to allow up to 4 units. It's going to be hard for us to maintain that moving forward, especially when you might have a carriage house on the side of a single family dwelling where they want a separate access. So we've had a lot of discussion with our works department. They're fine with allowing up to 2 driveways per property for a standard single family residential lot, as long as there's a minimum of 6 meter spacing between those driveway access points. So that's what we've added here in terms of bylaw changes. We've also recommended to increase the width of that driveway access because right now it's at 7.5 meters, I think. And we need 8 meters to put 3 parking stalls across the front. So in order to accommodate more parking, we could have increased that to 8 meters and then have 3 parking stalls from that one driveway access. The other bylaw that we're proposing to amend is the subdivision development servicing bylaw. If council remembers, currently we have an exemption within this bylaw to not require road reconstruction and curb and gutter and improvements to the roadway for a 2-lot split we referred to, which is a standard house being subdivided for another residential lot as a 2-lot split. Now, with Bill 44, we see a lot less subdivisions happening in the future to allow for another single family property. Instead, there might be 4 units built on one parcel with maybe it's stratified in the future. And so in order to avoid a loophole of 4 residential units being constructed with no improvements to our road infrastructure, we've kind of taken that theme of 2 units and kept that as the exemption. So if you build 2 or less, so even if it's a duplex, you don't need to rebuild the road, but anything above a duplex or even a duplex and secondary suites with 3 units and above requires the SDS bylaw improvements to be constructed. There's no questions on those 2 things. I'll sum up. So we have notified the public on the waiver of the proposed zoning bylaw amendment. If council does so choose, want to move forward with 3 readings at today's meeting in the Summerland review for the past 2 editions of the Summerland review. I do want to point out that section, I think 483, I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. I have it in my staff report. Thank you.
464.
464 states that for implementing a bylaw for the sole reason of Bill 44, we must not have a public hearing. And for that reason, we at the staff level decided to go forward with waiving the public hearing requirement. Council can discuss this. There are other elements changing in our zoning bylaw. We can have a public hearing about, but we're recommending that we move forward with 3 readings at tonight's meeting. Thank you.
Councillor Peak.
I'll bring forward the staff recommendation for the reading. The one that's was on the screen.
Second, Councillor Trainer. Just get that back on the screen.
No, it's on the presentation.
Just, you had it up.
That's it.
Right, okay. So, so you're moving the whole thing or just the first part?
No, I'll move the whole thing.
thing,
Let's have a
okay.
discussion.
Yeah,
We need
okay.
to have a discussion.
So it's been moved and second. Any further discussion? Councillor Betts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just wondering if you were interested in further discussing the 2 versus 3 story requirement for single family home.
I don't know, can we see how it goes and can it be amended at a later date if we so choose?
Definitely. And I think that's a good point to make to the public as well, is that things aren't going to be changing overnight. We're going to be continuing monitoring this as we move forward. I've know of other jurisdictions. Kelowna, I just went to a presentation. They went through very quickly. They got their zoning bylaw amendments done in February, and their theme in the council discussion is that they know there's going to be mistakes in the future, and they're going to have to make tweaks. But they just want to get these bylaw amendments in place for us to evaluate them and then tweak as we continue to move forward. And I'm still committing myself to bring forward the zoning bylaw on an annual basis back to council to making tweaks. So definitely, yeah, we will definitely be doing that.
So then I would suggest we just take the wait and see approach. Okay, no further discussion, then I'll call the question. All in favor? And none opposed. And I should just note, with this now being approved, we can have a public hearing for the Bill 44 and Bill 35. So, which means in the public comment period at the end of the meeting, we can allow anybody to comment on what we've just been discussing right now, because that would be a de facto public hearing. Moving along to notices of motion. Does anybody have a notice of motion? Councillor Betts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to have our Director of Development Services and the Development Department pursue more looking into green roofs within the District of Summerland, within our building bylaw and our zoning structure.
So we'll discuss that next meeting. Okay.
If that needs to take a couple meetings, that's okay. I understand our Development Services Department is very busy, but I do think that this is important.
Okay, and maybe you can, in the meantime, sit down with the corporate officer and figure out the wording for that for the next meeting. Anyone else notice? Councillor Peak.
Thank you very kindly, Your Worship. I did send an email out to council about this, but I would like to do a notice of motion to have the district create a public art policy, and that could perhaps be through the work with the Summerland Arts Council, and that we also consider through the budget process setting aside year over year money to support a public art policy and art acquisition. So I would have that discussion with the staff and bring it forward at a future meeting.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, then we move on to council reports. Does anybody have a report? Councillor Betts.
I'm not so keen to be talking so much, but I just wanted to share with our community that I was able to host all of the Giants Head Elementary Grade 2 students here on May 7th. And they all walked down, and I was able to tour them through downstairs so that they could have a better understanding of how our local government works, which I just think is just so important as an introduction. They were just beginning to learn about these items. And I had them all come up. They came in 3 groups. They came upstairs and got to sit in everybody's chair and have a little discussion and learn a little bit about things like, where does our electricity come from, our water? Do you get these things? Are they free? Should they be free? And it just helped them kind of understand how government worked. My little daughter got to sit in the mayor's chair, and I was just really, really pleased to see it, and just really excited to see their engagement, and actually the engagement from all of the students, and their patience and their curiosity was really impressive. And I just wanted to give them a little shout out.
Next time, take them to the sewage treatment plant and see how they like that. Anybody else? Councillor Pig.
And thank you very kindly, Your Worship. I wanted to thank the public for the fact that we're allowed to go to conferences like SILGA. I find that those working conferences with workshops are really valuable. The connections you make with other public policy holders are really good to have. I wanted to say that I attended the Turning Points open house. And the food bank had good displays on. There was lots of great interaction, and I have to say that there was very few negative comments in any way regarding the opportunity for the affordable housing to be there. Good clarification on what that meant and what the process would be to get if you wanted to be there. It was just a really good evening, so it was a good opportunity. I'd also like to mention that I attended the funeral for Barb Robson, wife of a longtime serving councillor plus RCMP retired, Orv Robson, and it was a huge funeral, and there were about 5 personal stories presented about Barb. It was just really quite wonderful.
Thank you. Councillor Trainer, do you have anything to report?
I think you mentioned that we all went to SILGA, which I found to be really, really interesting. The councillors that did attend, we went to everything that was available to us. And it's really good to talk to other people in our region and know that they are facing a lot of the same issues that we're facing. And the president of UBCM, she got up to speak, and she talked about how infrastructure is a really, really big issue, and how municipalities cannot keep up with the cost, and that we need a sustainable infrastructure funding program from the province and the federal government. And so I think that when our municipalities can come together, both at SILGA and at UBCM, get our common goals together, our common problems, and present it to higher levels of government together, that it's much more impactful. So these conferences are really, really useful. And I'm really glad that we had a good representation of Summerland at SILGA.
Thank you. So nothing? No? Okay. Public comment period. Any members of the public would like to make a comment? No?
On? Okay. My name is Pamela Ayotte, and I'm at 7720 Prairie Valley Road. And this is in regards to, again, the dog park at Peach Orchard. The Peach Orchard Dog Park brings people together outside in the fresh air all year long, creates friendships and builds community bonds. Is that not the purpose of a community park? Now, this topic has far more consultation and scrutiny than far more controversial and expensive concerns. Not including this meeting today, there has been now incredible 22 or 28 or more, if you're a stakeholder group, opportunities for public input and feedback on this issue. Since 2012, the first formal request for a dog park was made there. It has been 14 council meetings, 6 open houses, 3 community surveys. We've been through 3 different parks and recreation directors, 3 elections have gone by. And finally, there have been 3 different consultants hired who have run 5 different consultations. We challenge any person or group who thinks this process has been rushed, last minute, or not researched well to consider what has already been done to this point. Between consultants and many dozen hours of staff time, the study of the park would have the district cost possibly over $300,000. This process keeps going on and on and on with no end, it seems. Enough time and money and consultants and staff has been spent studying for a dog park that we could have actually paid for a few dog parks. Summerland residents have numbers for support of this amenity at this location. We have tons of positive feedback and handwritten signatures. Let's make Peach Orchard a permanent dog park. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else, please?
Mayor, council members, thank you very much for your service. I'm here with a group of 4 families.
Sorry, sir, could we just get your name and civic address for the record? Thanks.
Yes, my name is John Davies. I live at 6410 Clark Street. And I just wanted to thank you members for your service and also voice my support as well as for other families that are with me for the dog park. We think it's an asset to the community. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm Peter Hatcher. I live at 7714 Hespeler Road. Your worship and council, thank you very much for this opportunity. The introduction to this meeting that I attended was the density increase. And that is going to mean a lot of people wanting more dogs, and they're going to want them in areas where you're going to have high density and fewer cars to drive to the far-fetched areas that we currently have off-leash dog parks. I would argue that a critical public amenity is an off-leash dog park that is big enough for dogs to run around off-leash, which is a need of every dog, and on a daily basis, and it has to be accessible, not driving miles to get there, which also is not very good for the environment. I would argue that dogs are a public benefit. I would argue that they are here as companions to many of us, young and old. We have many children who are under stress due to climate change, smoke, family circumstances, and a variety of medical conditions. Dogs are most useful in supporting them. We have many older folks who depend on dogs as companions, many of them single. I would argue that dogs are a public benefit, and we need to provide what dogs need, which is recreation, that's physical running exercise off leash in an area big enough for most dogs to get a good run, and in an area where they can socialize because they have social needs as well. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Anybody else like to speak?
Good evening. My name is Kathleen Esterbrooks. I live at 13204 Armstrong Avenue. I just want to echo what's been said this evening. It's the dog park is an asset that we need to hang on to. I've been hearing and reading a lot, and this is the point I wanted to make this evening. Hearing and reading a lot from opposition saying that it's being used for the exclusive use of dog park people. And I'd like to say that I don't think anybody has ever said that only dogs can use it. I go down there with a chair regularly and a book, and it's a great place. And anybody can do that. It's not, people aren't being disallowed from using it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Would anybody else like to speak to council? Okay, then I can ask for a motion to adjourn the meeting. Councillor Van Elfen, Councillor Peak, all in favor? And that carries.